Returning values is pretty neat. Now let's go back to arguments though. You learned how you can use function arguments. One additional nice feature is the fact that you can also use default arguments. This means you can set up a default argument which will be used if you call that function without passing the data for that argument. Remember, previously we got an error in this case. With default arguments, this is actually something we can do without errors. Here's how it works. We get a function definition with the greet function in this case again. And now the age part here actually is a default argument. We provide a default value for it, 29. Then we use it in our function. And the interesting part, of course, is when we call the function, you see I actually don't pass a second argument. Without a default argument, we would have to do that. Otherwise, we'll get an error. But in this case, it works fine without it. Let's also use that in our blockchain example. We have a good use case for that with our starting value here. Let's go back to initializing the blockchain as an empty array. Now, clearly, if I now clear that and execute my code, we get an error because with getLastBlockchainValue, we try to extract the value which doesn't exist. Now, let's fix this by using a default argument. Here in addValue, I'll use add my last transaction value. And this is now actually what I will append as a first value in the new block. Last transaction. Now what I can do is, I can of course pass that as an argument to my addValue call. Now I do that by, for example, passing getLastBlockchainValue, getLastBlockchainValue, and don't forget the opening and closing parentheses. Now if I do that, what do I provide for the first addValue? Well, I can provide my starting array here. So what we previously added directly to our blockchain definition up here. With this code, if I run it, it'll work fine and it'll give me the exact same result as before. But we're not using default arguments here. And actually, we can improve our code by doing so. The default obviously is that we want to get the last blockchain value. So it would be nice if we could still use addValue like this. But obviously, this gives us an error, as my IDE shows. So what we can do is we can go into our addValue definition and add our default argument by adding an equal sign after the argument name and then the default value. In this case, this function call to getLastBlockchainValue. If I now save this and I execute the file again, this unfortunately doesn't work. The reason for this is it still executes that even if we do provide a value. And therefore, it still executes that for the first addValue call where we have no last value. So we'll have to fall back to the second best solution. We'll provide our 1 here, so this one array, as a default value so that we can omit it here for the first addValue call. And unfortunately, we'll have to use the longer version for the subsequent addValue calls. But still, we now got a different way of making sure that we don't run into this below error. And we're taking advantage of default arguments. Something we'll, of course, also see a lot throughout the course. So now with that, if I clear this and now I execute that file, it works again. The second best solution, as I mentioned, but also just one of the many examples you'll see throughout the course.